I'm Larry Fedorik. This is I Was 8. My weekly personal journal about growing up in the prairie town of Waukau, Saskatchewan. All of these events actually happened. Only some of the names have been changed. On with this week's adventure. I Was 8.
Season 3, Chapter 4. Mr. Vohonyk.
I'm an early boomer, among the first wave of boomers. Of course, that comes from baby boom. A big war had ended, and for years, those who had survived said, "I'm alive, let's make out." My folks didn't get that notion until the 1950s, but nevertheless, boomer. It's been great being a boomer. For most of our lives, we ruled the world. Everything was about us, designed for us, made for us. I mean mine. We're losing grip on that control. There's X and next and Y and Z, and millennials don't get me started. But boomers, we had a good run. When I was 8, I didn't know I was a boomer, but it was a time when we still heard about the war. Not that much from people who fought in it. In many cases, they didn't want to talk about it. But as a kid, you still heard about the war. You knew someone who had served, possibly even saw action. I don't remember it being taught in school to a great extent. Of course, school, what do you remember learning? Nothing. Whatever you got out of school was absorbed through reverse osmosis, because I certainly don't remember actually paying attention. Whatever else we learned about the war, we learned from TV and movies. War movies, World War II war movies. Love those movies, still do. I always make note of when the movie was made, because there's a big difference between a World War II movie made in 1943, say, when the war was still raging, to one made in the late 40s or 50s. Then the spin changed again in the 60s and 70s and even in the 2000s. As a kid, war was also a game we played. Oh, a serious game. We donned our fatigues, grabbed our toy guns, stick rifles, whatever we had, and our little Canadian prairie town became a French village, one we were trying to save from the Nazis. When I was 8, war was this game. It was a TV show called Combat. It was movies, and it was real too, because you knew someone who had served. This brings me to Mr. Vohonyk, also known around town as Old Man Vohonyk. Grown-ups called him Old Man Vohonyk, and so did us kids, unless we were around grown-ups, and then we called him Mr. Vohonyk. Mr. Vohonyk was in the war, but the great one, the first one, World War I, and by all accounts had seen a lot of action. Old Man Vohonyk also had this other rather unkind distinction. He was sort of known as the town drunk. Unkind because no one had diagnosed PTSD yet or spoken those terms. Shell-shocked was the best description one had that was even close. Battle fatigue, the war willies. I also say distinction because given our town, there would have been a lot of stiff competition for the title of town drunk. So, to come out on top was no small accomplishment. Mr. Vohonyk was no Otis of Mayberry, Andy Griffith comical town drunk either. No siree. Well, PTSD and the disease of alcoholism. Geez, is this a fun story yet? As kids, we stayed clear of Old Man Vohonyk. First of all, an imposing figure. Tall, thin, cap pulled down over his dark, sunken eyes, coat buttoned up with the collar up even in the middle of August. He didn't walk, he marched, big black boots clomping down the street. And of course, we all knew he was in the war, the great one, and killed a lot of bad guys hand to hand. There was really no point in being in his sphere, perhaps being mistaken for the enemy, and he'd kill you. Our house was on a corner, and 5 houses down from the front of our house was Mr. Vohonyk's house. You also avoided his house. If you were walking down that part of the street, you crossed before his house and walked on the other side of the street until you were well past. It was a tiny little cottage type of house in need of paint, thick layer of prairie dirt on the windows, yard overgrown with weeds, wild hedges, dead trees. Yeah, let's just cross. You never saw Mr. Vohonyk around town that much, hardly ever. I mean, he wasn't ever at the store, certainly not church. My friend Jerry's mom said she thought he had a grown son who lived in the city and brought him groceries and newspapers every couple of weeks. After the war, his wife died of the flu, and he never remarried. That's what Jerry's mom said. I never thought of asking my dad about Mr. Vohonyk. Dad knew him. Dad was the town bartender at the hotel pub, and Mr. Vohonyk would be there every day. Routinely, he would don his suit, a thick gray tweed number, his black boots, his cap, and walk downtown to the pub. Dad told me once there he sat in a dark corner and drank. And then drank some more, and then had a couple of drinks before closing. Often I'd be awake around that time of night, A, because I knew Dad was coming home, and B, I might have to moderate my parents' debate of the lateness of my father's arrival and or his consumption of the very products he was serving to the Waukau public. Most nights were fine, but because I was up, I could hear Mr. Vohonyk clomping up the sidewalk of our side street. Then from my window I could see this dark, ghostly silhouette turn the corner and march past our house to his house. This is the thing. Mr. Vohonyk marched. It's how he comported himself after several hours of drinking alcohol. He would not be a staggering drunk. He was too proud, and he used his marching training to walk a straight line. He stood tall, long legs with a large, determined stride. Arms first, straight by his side, fists clenched, except for thumbs pointing forward, and then swinging rhythmically. Drunk as a skunk, of course, but marching. I could hear him. This meant the bar was closed. This meant Dad should be home soon. He marched a nice straight line, but imagine this for a second. A straight line between point A and point B. You depart point A, but you are off by even 1 or 2 degrees. Your straight line takes you off course. See what I mean? This was Mr. Vohonyk, off by just a degree or 2, almost always to the right, which meant eventually his foot came off the sidewalk and he ended up in our Caragana hedges. I'd hear him go in, maybe a few F-bombs, then I'd wait for the rustle of him getting back up on his feet and for the clomp, clomp, clomp to start again. I'd watch out the window to see him turn the corner and head home. A couple of times there was nothing for like 10 minutes. I think he just had a nap in there, and then went home. One night I heard the marching, then it stopped, and I heard our back door open and yelling from the kitchen. My mom's voice was saying, "But Mr. Vohonyk, but Mr. Vohonyk." Oh no, he was in the house. What should I do? I grabbed a stick I had, but I'd be no match for him. I was 8 and not properly trained in lethal hand-to-hand combat. Frickin' school, you don't learn anything useful. I made a plan. The kitchen was at the back of the house. I could run downstairs out the front door undetected. And I figure, even in the dark, in bare feet and pajamas, I could be at the RCMP detachment in 6 minutes. By the time I got downstairs, everything was quiet. So I peered into the kitchen. "What just happened?" I asked. Well, Mom said Mr. Vohonyk saw the light on and decided to pay a visit. He had some issues with his dentures and threw them on our kitchen table to illustrate his point. And then he put them back in his head and left. Mom was boiling water to clean the table. Even after that, for about a month, I took my meals at the kitchen counter or in the living room. That Saturday, Dad asked me if I'd like to make some extra money the following weekend. Money? Absolutely. I need money. I think I was saving for something. Probably just candy. Dad said Mr. Vohonyk needs some help cleaning up his yard, and I told him you'd be happy to help, and he said he'll pay you. Oh no, Mr. Vohonyk's yard? Dad, no. Oh, not next Saturday. I'm busy. I have a thing, meetings, brain surgery. Can't be done. Too late. I was volunteered. Plus now I had a week to sweat this out. Maybe I could think of something before then. Faking sick. I got the plague, Mom. Gee, maybe if I was lucky, I'd actually get the plague and not have to go. I thought about telling my friends, hey, next Saturday you all get your BB guns and surround his home. Keep an eye on me, just in case. I ended up not telling anyone. And though normally I looked forward to a weekend, I was dreading this one. Finally, it was Saturday morning. I was eating my breakfast, my last meal. I'd be dead by sunset. I said goodbye to my parents and some of my toys. Walking 5 doors down from home took me about an hour. Finally, I knocked on Mr. Vohonyk's back door. You know, daytime, without his suit and cap, he didn't look quite as scary. Looked kind of like my grandpa. He said we'd better get to work. And together in the backyard, we started pulling weeds and gathering up broken sticks and branches and putting them in a pile near the back lane. After a few hours of this, we surveyed our work. Looked like nothing had been done. That's what a mess it was. Mr. Vohonyk said it was time for a break and invited me inside. Okay. We sat in his messy kitchen. Mr. Vohonyk pulled a bottle of something out of the cupboard, poured himself a few shots. I got a glass of water. It was delicious. Suddenly, and without warning, he grabbed a large bayonet. Oh, wait, no, it's just a kitchen knife. And he sliced 2 pieces of bread. He took out a jar of something, looked like it was from the war, and spread this on our bread. He gave me one. It tasted kind of funny, so when he wasn't looking, I folded it up and put it in my pocket. Done. After lunch, we collected more weeds and branches, and finally we were done. He said it was time to come in and he would pay me. Well, it ain't over till it's over, but it looks like I survived. And now I was getting money. This time we went to the living room, where Mr. Vohonyk opened up an old chest. He rummaged around until he found this little box under some pictures. He opened the box and said he was giving me all of these coins. Coins? They didn't look like any money I'd ever seen. This was a franc, he said, and this one was a mark. Franc and mark, those aren't money. Those are people. Who calls money franc and mark? You know, if you're going to give me money named after people, how about bills? Folding money. He put the coins in a Crown Royal pouch, cinched it shut, thanked me for my hard work. Well, great. I was thirsty, hungry, filthy, exhausted, with a sack full of play money. How would this go over at the candy store? Will an old franc get me an O. Henry? How many francs for a Henry? For that matter, how many Mike and Ikes can I get for a mark? I asked him about the pictures, all army men, friends of his. He started this story about all of them running up a hill while being shot at. And when he got to the top and jumped in a trench, he realized he was the only one from his group who had made it. Then he just got quiet for a really long time. I saw Mr. Vohonyk again a few nights later from my window as he once again angled into our Karaganas. About a week later, on laundry day, Mom found bread in my pants. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I kept those coins for many years. They must have got lost or thrown out somewhere sometime, because I don't have them now. Wish I did. You couldn't spend that money, but I had used the coins as evidence that I had not only been in Vohonyk's yard, but in his house and lived to tell the tale. Once word got around town, I was a bit of a legend. Larry survived the Vohonyk house. Stupid kids, right? Larry survived the Vohonyk house. Vohonyk had survived the Great War. Mostly. Later, I would understand that Mr. Vohonyk didn't just put on a suit every night. He was putting on a uniform. And when he wandered by our house in the afternoon, he was off to war. And when he sat in that dark corner of the pub, he fought that war again, every night.
I Was 8 is a weekly storytelling podcast written, produced, and voiced by Larry Fedorik. Larry Fedorik, that's Fedoruk, can be reached at larryfedoruk37@gmail.com.